a powerful montage of protests from around the world, showcasing diverse crowds, fiery clashes, and peaceful marches. Quick cuts show slogans, signs, and intense moments of confrontation and solidarity.
Across continents, in cities and rural towns alike, the world has erupted into a chorus of voices demanding change. From the streets of Paris to the squares of Hong Kong, from the rural fields of India to the urban avenues of America, people are rising up, fighting for a multitude of causes that in many ways are remarkably similar. But why now? Why are these movements growing, spreading, and in some cases, turning violent? Today, we dive deep into the global wave of protests, riots, and demonstrations to explore their causes, the tactics used, the government responses, and the common threads that unite them. Stay with us as we unravel the forces driving this global unrest and examine what it all means for our collective future. Economic inequality has been a persistent trigger for protests worldwide. The divide between the wealthy elite and the struggling masses has reached a tipping point in many societies. In France, the Yellow Vests movement, which began in 2018, was sparked by a proposed fuel tax hike. However, it quickly grew into a larger outcry against the high cost of living, stagnating wages, and perceived elitism within the government. Similarly, in Chile, a seemingly minor subway fare increase ignited mass protests that revealed deeper grievances about income inequality, access to education, and healthcare. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, decades of government corruption and economic mismanagement led to a financial collapse, pushing people into the streets demanding systemic change. Corruption within the political system and a lack of genuine representation have driven millions to protest across the globe. In Brazil, waves of protests have erupted over the years, targeting corruption at the highest levels of government. The impeachment of President Dilma Rousseff in 2016, followed by the corruption scandals of her successor, Michel Temer, highlighted the deep-seated mistrust Brazilians have toward their leaders. In India, the Citizenship Amendment Act, or CIA, sparked protests among those who saw it as a discriminatory law against the Muslim minority. Critics argued that the CIA, combined with the National Register of Citizens, or NRC, threatened the secular fabric of India's democracy. Similarly, in South Africa, frustration over government corruption and economic disparities have repeatedly boiled over into protests. These movements are not just about individual laws or policies, but are rooted in a deeper sense of political disenfranchisement and the belief that those in power are not working for the people. Human rights have become a central issue in many of the world's protests, with movements demanding equality, justice, and the protection of fundamental freedoms. The Black Lives Matter (BLM) movement in the United States, reignited by the murder of George Floyd in 2020, quickly spread across the globe, with protests against racial injustice occurring in cities far beyond America's borders. In Hong Kong, the pro-democracy protests that began in 2019 were a response to an extradition bill that many saw as a threat to the region's autonomy and freedoms. Although the bill was withdrawn, the protests evolved into a broader movement against Beijing's growing influence over Hong Kong. In Poland, a recent law tightening abortion restrictions sparked massive demonstrations, with women's rights activists calling it a violation of their rights and bodily autonomy. These movements, though diverse in their specific demands, share a common call for respect, dignity, and the protection of human rights. In our hyper-connected world, social media has become a powerful tool for organizing and amplifying protest movements. Hashtags like #BlackLivesMatter, #EndSARS, and #Fridays for Future have not only mobilized millions, but have also created a sense of global solidarity. Social media allows for the rapid dissemination of information, enabling movements to gain momentum quickly. For instance, the #MeToo movement, which began as a response to sexual harassment and assault, spread across borders, encouraging women from all walks of life to share their stories and demand change. Similarly, the climate strikes led by youth activists like Greta Thunberg have sparked a global movement, with millions of young people participating in strikes and protests, demanding urgent action on climate change. While the specific triggers for protests vary from country to country, Many of these movements share common grievances. Economic inequality, political corruption, and the erosion of human rights are not confined to one nation. They are global issues that resonate with people everywhere. The demands for economic justice in Chile echo those of the Yellow Vests in France. The calls for political transparency in Brazil are mirrored by protests in India. The fight for human rights in the United States, Poland, and Hong Kong reflects a universal desire for dignity and freedom. These shared grievances suggest that, while the protests are local, the struggles are global. Protests take many forms, from peaceful marches and symbolic gestures to more aggressive tactics like strikes and blockades. Peaceful demonstrations like the women's marches in the United States or the climate strikes often rely on sheer numbers to make a statement. Civil disobedience, such as sit-ins or occupying public spaces, is another tactic used to draw attention to a cause. However, not all protests remain peaceful. In some cases, tensions between protesters and authorities escalate, leading to riots and violent clashes. These incidents often occur when protesters feel their demands are being ignored, or when authorities respond with excessive force. The line between peaceful protest and violent unrest is thin, and once crossed, the consequences can be severe. Governments respond to protests in different ways, depending on the nature of the protest and the political context. Some governments choose to engage with protesters, offering dialogue and compromise. For example, in response to the Yellow Vests movement, the French government suspended the fuel tax increase and held national debates to address broader concerns. However, other governments take a more hardline approach. In Hong Kong, the authorities deployed tear gas, rubber bullets, and even live ammunition to disperse protesters. In Nigeria, the #EndSARS protests against police brutality were met with a violent crackdown, leading to international condemnation. These responses can either quell the unrest or, more often, escalate tensions, leading to further violence and instability. At the heart of most protests is a demand for change. Change in policies, change in leadership, or change in the system itself. Whether it's fighting for economic justice, political transparency, or human rights, these movements reflect a growing frustration with the status quo. People are no longer willing to accept systems that perpetuate inequality, corruption, or injustice. They are demanding a new social contract, one that prioritizes fairness, accountability, and respect for human dignity. The protests may differ in their specifics, but the underlying message is clear: the world is crying out for change. Youth and grassroots movements have played a crucial role in many of these protests. Young people, in particular, have been at the forefront of demanding change, driven by a sense of urgency about the future. The climate strikes, for example, have been led by young activists who see the climate crisis as the defining issue of their generation. Grassroots movements, often organized at the community level, have also been instrumental in sustaining protests and building momentum. These movements are decentralized, relying on local leaders and community networks to organize and mobilize. This grassroots approach makes the movements more resilient and adaptable, allowing them to respond quickly to changing circumstances and maintain pressure on those in power. The impact of these protests extends far beyond the borders of the countries where they occur. They inspire solidarity movements around the world, create pressure on international organizations, and even influence global policies. For instance, the Black Lives Matter movement not only sparked protests across the United States, but also led to demonstrations in Europe, Africa, and Asia, challenging systemic racism worldwide. Similarly, the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong have influenced other movements pushing back against authoritarianism, from Belarus to Myanmar. The global nature of these protests suggests that we are witnessing a broader shift in the political landscape, a move toward more participatory, people-driven forms of governance. As we look at the world today, it's clear that we are living through a period of profound change. The protests, riots, and demonstrations we see are not isolated events. They are part of a global wave of activism that is challenging old systems and demanding something better. The question now is, where do we go from here? Will these movements bring about the change they seek, or are we at the beginning of a longer, more complex struggle? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain: the world is watching, and the voices of the people will not be silenced.
Thank you for watching. If this video resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for more deep dives into the issues shaping our world today.